I'm Marcus White, leader of Everyone is God, Britain's most visionary political party. I want to solve every problem in Britain, and I want to see everyone fulfilled. This is a podcast of hard questions. See me cross-examined. Do I have the answers? Do I really have a plan that works? Ask your questions and decide for yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. You're welcome to the Everyone is God political podcast. I'm Miss Brudsy, and I'm joined with the lovely Marcus White. Marcus, how are we feeling on this lovely day?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm looking forward to taking a different angle in this podcast. I hope it's going to be very interesting for people and thought-provoking on what is a very difficult situation that we're going to be looking at.
Okay, and guys, this is Marcus White. He's the leader of Everyone is God's political party. A bit of always a tongue twister that for some reason.
I know, bro. You get this wrong all the time. There's too many P's in there.
I know. So many different things, so many different podcasts. But yes,
we're quite relaxed on this show, so it's fine.
Well, I don't know how relaxed we're going to be, Marcus, because we're talking about some very sort of high temperature, very controversial things today. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the reaction from the Henry Nowak stabbing. Our hearts and condolences. I mean, I've done several videos already, talking about this. Marcus, your thoughts on the situation? Or?
Well, look, I think, where were we starting? I think we were going to start with the far right and Nigel Farage, what he had to say about it.
Well, Nigel Farage, he's been very vocal. He's even gone to the extent of suggesting that the police are under some sort of two-tier system where white people, his target demographic, are being persecuted against and
discriminated. He's saying the police are discriminating against the white population. I believe that is his view and some of the far right's view.
Okay, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so look, firstly, obviously, I want to say my sympathies go out to Henry Nowak's family. Firstly, before we start. My view is this. I'm going to base everything I'm saying today on the brief research I've done online, watching the video of the police dealing with Henry Nowak, and also my AI research. And so I'm going on that research that I've done briefly. And I think when you look at just that, I don't see any justification or reason to suspect that the police are discriminating against whites. I don't think the evidence that I've seen supports that. And unfortunately, if that's the case, then it suggests that, groups, and I'm not going to mention any names, I know we've already mentioned names, but it suggests that groups are using this murder for political gain. And, that's not something I would ever want to do, and I wouldn't want my party doing this. My party is about getting to the root cause of issues and solving them properly forever. It's not about trying to use things for political maneuvering. So, Brad, what I thought to start off with, what I want to do is really drill down into exactly what happened and maybe a reasonable assessment of that to make this case that it doesn't look like there's discrimination against whites in this particular case.
Okay, go for it.
The first thing is, one of the things my party is big on, and something we believe is very fundamental, is the ability to correctly assess facts and not speculate and not form opinions before you've researched something properly. And this happens all the time in our society. People react to situations and something they immediately see, and this is normal. I don't want to criticize people for this. This is the way we're emotionally wired. But people formulate opinions that are speculative and not based on proper research. And my view is that that is detrimental. It creates all sorts of political mess like we have now. It divides people. It's controversial. It's divisive. It can mislead people. And, in my politics of my party, we want to try and really reduce all of this. And again, we want to educate on people how to actually look at facts and form, evidence-based opinions rather than, wild speculation. It feeds it all into the conspiracy theories and
Yeah.
negative speculation about people.
I think as well, like like you said, everyone should always look at a situation and give their own opinion on it, but just try and look at the facts without the bias that you already have, that you already know
Yes,
you have. I mean,
precisely.
some people know who they are deep down inside. They know exactly who they are. They know exactly about who they hate, who they don't like, and what they want. But they will still like I don't. Is it a performance, Marcus? Are they able to? Is it because I don't
I think
understand it?
it's a
Go on.
psychology, the the way we work psychologically is we're very invested in our feelings, and our feelings drive us, and all of that's then based on our upbringing, the way we were brought up to react to certain situations, and the unfortunately the prejudices we were all taught, because we all have them.
Yeah.
Nobody's immune from this. So people don't realize psychologically 95% of our decisions and our reactions are subconsciously driven. It's not driven by our conscious thought and what we're thinking now. It's driven by pre-programmed processes that happened in our childhood, where our basic beliefs and cultural values were formed. And this is a massive area of psychology that everybody needs to understand, because if you don't understand this, you're blindly driven. 95% of your decisions in life are completely blindly driven by your upbringing and your culture. It's like in these countries where they do female circumcision. They believe it's right in those countries, and I'm not criticizing it, but their culture is, they're taught this is right, and so they follow that, even though women are dying because of it.
Yeah.
But we're all subject to this, and we need to understand the psychology. And I want to sort of unpick this today in
Yeah.
the first part of this show.
Okay, Marcus. So, what would be your party's solutions to the problems of violent
Well,
crimes? And
sorry, bear with me. Can I just what I wanted to do, Brad, if we can,
okay,
let's go through the facts that I have
sorry.
available, and I think
Okay,
most of the public have, and try and do an objective assessment of what happened with the information that is publicly available.
yeah,
So the first thing is that I noticed, okay, the first fact that I understand is the brother of Vikram Digwa, the brother of the murderer, called the police to the scene. He wasn't present at the murder, but, and again, I stress, this is all of stuff I've seen from online research and AI research. So I can't validate all of this because I wasn't there, but I'm just basing it on what I've found online. So the brother called the police, and then he wasn't present at the crime, but he was present at the scene when the police were there. So this is the first crucial piece of evidence, right? If you imagine, put yourself, we're assessing now, are the police biased against whites? So let's start assessing the facts. So a police officer called, two police officers, I think it was, are called to the scene by a person who claims they've been attacked. Now, would somebody who's just fatally stabbed somebody ring the police and invite them to come to the scene and have a conversation with them? This is extremely rare. So straight away, the police are overwhelmingly, based on the information they've got at that moment in time, they're going to be thinking, this is the victim, they've called us to the scene because they've been attacked. They're not going to be thinking they've just fatally stabbed somebody and now they're calling the police there so they can research this crime and convict them. Of course. So straight away, the police are guided by what has happened in a very strong way. They're guided to believe that Vikram Digwa was the victim. So that's the first point, and this is crucial in my view. Now, the second thing is, okay, when they got there, both Vikram and his brother maintained the narrative that they were the victims. So this is all in the police's mind. This all makes sense. They said they were a victim. The police have come to the crime. They're maintaining that story. They then see, you can see in the video, you see Henry Nowak on the floor. Okay. And he showed the very unusual thing about this. You can clearly see in the video, you can't see any blood coming from him. So Henry Nowak then says, I've been stabbed and I can't breathe. And the police officer says, where have you been stabbed? And he doesn't answer that question because the man is dying. So the police officer doesn't get a clear answer. And you can't see any blood at all in the footage. There is no blood. So now the police officer is in a position where he's got somebody on the floor who says they're being stabbed, but there's no obvious evidence that he has been stabbed. So from their perspective, they're thinking, well, everything checks out here. It looks like Vikram was the victim. This chap doesn't appear to be telling the truth. Henry doesn't, because he's got no blood coming out of him. So at that point, everything supports what Vikram said. And I don't see how you can criticize the police for that. They can only go on the evidence they have at that moment in time. And bear in mind, when police attend scenes, they've got no idea who's telling the truth. Usually they're very chaotic. People are lying to them all the time, and they can't figure all of this out instantly in the moment. So do you see that everything the police, as far as I could see, were aware of, suggested that Vikram's story was true? Now, apparently, again, my research says, once they realized that Henry actually was stabbed, they took his handcuffs off and administered CPR. So as soon as there was evidence that they could see that he had been stabbed, they then immediately took the handcuffs off and administered CPR. Now, I find it difficult, based on that evidence, if that's the correct facts I've found out online, I find it very difficult to see how the police can be accused of discriminating against whites. They've just gone on the evidence and acted on the evidence that they have available and try to process it as best they could. And I think, this is where things get highly politicized and highly emotive. And my party is about saying, whoa, wait a minute, let's just calmly look at the facts and put ourselves in the position of the police and everybody there and ask, in those circumstances, with that information, was their action reasonable? And from what I can see, it was, and they did the right things. So, I understand from Henry Nowak's point of view, this is extremely upsetting, but, the police can only do their best. And I think it looks like they're being unfairly criticised and used as political football to kick around for the benefit of other people. And I don't think that's good at all.
There's a few things in there. I think anyone that articulately looks at all the information that we have and puts themselves in the exact picture that you paint, the exact picture that we all see in the video, I think you have to understand that this was not a masterminded crime. The whole family, this is what I've said the whole time, the family there have obviously tried to protect their son, and everyone else and everyone there that was complicit in those lies, they have sold a picture to the police. The police don't see any blood. It looks like a very simple case in their eyes, and I don't think it fair enough if and we have to bear in mind, I have mentioned this as well, these were white police officers. Do people really think white people are going to discriminate against other white people? That just doesn't make sense.
No,
it don't make no sense.
No, I just think we actually want to put laws in place to stop this. We believe negative speculation, and when I say speculation, I mean forming and expressing an opinion that has no factual evidence supporting it whatsoever. When you form a negative opinion about somebody with no factual evidence for that negative opinion, I believe that should be illegal. It's sort of like slander. You know, now, I don't want to start criticizing people, but people are saying, the police are discriminatory in this instance, but there's no evidence for it. And I think that shouldn't be allowed. Look how divisive this is
It's
and the
definitely not
problems
helpful.
it causes. We're going to get on to the riots. This is how important this stuff is, and it needs legislating against. Society has got to change its consciousness around this. People can't just be saying whatever they want for whatever purpose they have. It's completely unacceptable, and it causes massive problems like riots, and we'll get on to this.
Yeah.
So, this is very serious when people express these opinions that they haven't thought about and they're using it for political ends. It's very, very serious. I mean, think of Trump, with his stuff with the Capitol Hill riots.
Yeah.
It goes right up to that scale and beyond. It feeds into discrimination and wars. So, it's
But
really, really serious.
but unfortunately now, like you just mentioned there, with Trump, he pardoned all those January 6 rioters. He pardoned them, and the amount of them that recommitted crimes that went straight back to jail, the amount of them that had rap
Yeah.
sheets as long as your arms, all different types of crimes.
Yeah.
This is what I'll say. Politics now has become a dirty place. And
Yes.
people like Nigel Farage, he is just doing the exact Trump playbook. He's getting into people's emotions, and he's
Yeah.
saying, "Look, the
Yes.
white people, you're being under attack over here.
Yeah.
It's a simple, tidy demographic to attack." He's done his
Yeah.
maths. He's probably
Yeah.
thought, right, if I can get this vote, if I can lock
Exactly.
in this vote, I'll become the next prime minister. And
Precisely.
I I think I
I
think that
think you're exactly
this
right. I mean, you're exactly
it's
right, Brad. Sorry to interrupt, but I don't want to criticize the other parties. I don't believe in it. You know, I don't want to criticize Nigel Farage or anybody because I'm not in their mind and I don't have the facts. But, you know, we're saying look at the facts, just calmly assess facts and formulate properly based opinions on things that aren't emotive and don't seek to divide people. We need to bring people together. There's enough division. We don't need to add to it.
Yeah, I mean, the only I don't know how moral, because when Henry Novak's dad comes out and says he does not want his son's
Yeah,
death manipulated, politicized, he does not want people using it to sort of cause hatred.
yeah,
This is a man that's just lost his son, and
exactly.
he has the gumption to say that.
Yeah,
Nigel Farage responds by saying, "I understand what Henry Novak's dad has said, but I suggest that we respond with pure rage." Like, what is the responsibility of a politician to come out and say this? Like, he's basically inciting the riots that we saw. We'll speak about later. But
yeah.
Marcus, let's move on anyway. So, what would be your
Just one
party
other thing
solution?
though, Brad. Sorry,
Yeah.
but just please let me finish. Indulge me
Okay.
here.
Yeah.
So our party's position is in education, we would teach all of this, the psychology of why we formulate opinions very rashly without thinking them through, and how to unpick all that, and how we're social animals and how we're driven to conform to the culture and beliefs we were given. We would teach all of this in psychology through schooling so people understand how they're motivated and how not to be blindly motivated. And sorry, I'm going to jump onto a completely different subject, but just
Okay.
to emphasize this point about formulating opinions. When I was campaigning at the last general election, one of the issues that came up a lot was the pollution of rivers, which is a very real issue. And people get very upset about it and blame the water companies. But as soon as you research this issue, you'll see that the fundamental problem here is not with the water companies at all. It's because the rainwater and sewage water goes through the same system. And when we have a rainstorm, all that water goes through the sewage system and completely overloads everything. Now, that's not the problem, really. You can't blame the water companies for that. This is the historic infrastructure they've inherited. But nobody does this research and nobody says this. And people just blindly formulate opinions, including politicians, that it's the water companies' fault. But it's not. It's the system they've inherited, and it costs hundreds of billions to fix this. This is why they can't snap their fingers and fix this problem. It's a major infrastructure thing. So I know it's a completely different subject, but it's the same thing. It's this whole thing of formulating opinions and blaming people without actually researching the problem and where the blame lies. And the blame in this situation with water doesn't really lie with anybody. It's a historic thing that's developed. This infrastructure has developed over 150 years. So, I completely changed subject there, but it's another example, a very common example of not researching opinions
Yep.
and views.
How do we break down to people that they're being manipulated? This is something that I really, because I don't understand how some people can jump to some of the conclusions. I don't understand how people could just throw their lives away, like, based on the anger of and being radicalized by even by politicians in this day and age. You've got a
Yeah.
politician telling people to respond with pure rage.
Yes.
What does he think people are going to do here?
So I think this is a really important question. Why is it people can be radicalized or have, like you say, these very unbalanced views that can be very detrimental to them and society. And the root of it lies in parenting. You see, where children have abuse or neglect in their childhood, they become very angry and they program that in at the deepest level. So they have this inner anger and these very strong emotions. Those emotions will play out for the rest of their life. So what happens is this makes them very volatile in adulthood, and they have a lot of fear and rage inside of them. And when you have these triggers, these emotive triggers, like, these, very tragically, the three girls that were killed at the dance school, these are very emotive triggers, and they trigger this well of emotion within people, and they start rioting or doing whatever else they do. Again, you see, this is the whole thing. All of this needs teaching. Every human being needs the knowledge of themselves to
Yep.
understand why we can be driven by very strong emotions, where they're coming from, and how we manage them and resolve it. That's the psychology of it. It fundamentally goes back to parenting, trauma in childhood, the beliefs and values that children were given, and the way they're taught to deal with things. Because a lot of these children are taught to be very reactive. You get angry about this because that's what the parents do. So they follow all of that behavior. My partner was a teacher in schools, and she saw this all the time, where children were very reactive and violent at times, and lo and behold, the parents are like it. So they've learned this behavior from the parents. This is where you have to go to unpick all of this. That is where you have to go.
Yeah, it's a very challenging one, and unfortunately, we don't have the best sort of role. We like not all parents are the best role models, and if some parents are stuck in this loophole generationally of my mum and dad didn't do anything, their
Yeah,
mum and dad didn't do anything, so they've
yeah,
not worked. They're
yeah,
like there's a whole cycle of people that haven't worked, and I feel like if you've got a whole generation of like I come from my family, everyone I've known has always worked, and I just don't. You can't even comprehend what that does to the mindset of a young child. Your
yeah,
parent sort of pushing those sort of negative values on you. Oh, what's the point in going work? Have a baby, get pregnant, get into a council house. Like
yeah.
more kids, more, and the kids get younger and younger. They're having kids younger and younger, and there's a whole cycle. And you can't expect proper foundations from there. And then what you end up doing is you end up, rather than people staring themselves in the mirror like most big people have to do and say, right, my life isn't where it is because of me. They say it's easier to say, right, it's because of them coming over on the boats. This is why my life sucks, and
Yeah.
like this is a how do we get people to sort of face those demons and sort of
So
really sort of come out of it?
it's a very profound job, and this is where you get to the root of all problems in society. This area we're talking about. This is where politicians need to go if you want to resolve pretty much any problem in politics. You have to go to psychology and our upbringing and our education. That is where we form adults. That's where adults get their value systems from. And so this is something we say in our party. If you want to solve any problem, you've got to radically change the whole of society. A complete re-education of all adults and all children, literally to solve any problem. That is why none of the problems we have solved. And when I say haven't solved, I mean over 10,000 years of human history. We have all the same problems now that we had 10,000 years ago. Division in wealth, violence, crime, corruption, greed, mental health problems, discrimination, racism, poverty. We had all that 10,000 years ago. We've got it all now. And the reason is because we haven't gone deep enough in our politics. No politician has stood up yet and said, we have to go much deeper and resolve human nature if we're going to resolve any of the problems we have. And that is what I say, and that is what my party is based on. We are a radical party, and that is what we want to do, because it's the only way you'll solve any problem.
Okay. And how would you guys deal with violent crime?
So we very much, how do you resolve violent crime? It's going to get very repetitive, this, and, forgive me, but it's exactly the same thing. See, all violent crime, it comes from your upbringing. That is the root of it. I'm not saying it's the only factor, but that is the area where you have most control and most ability to guide adults in a way where they become very constructive adults in human life. Sorry, guide children so they become constructive adults. And we believe that you need to regulate and support parenting in every single family. And this is controversial. A lot of people don't want interference from the state, and I don't think it should be viewed as interference of the state. I feel it should be society's duty to make sure, and when I say make sure, by actually, social workers going into every family after every child is born and checking, is this child being brought up in a loving, stable environment? And we need to do that. Otherwise, you'll never solve anything. So
Would you be in favour of taking people's children away if the parents are deemed to? I know we kind of have that now already, but if the parents are, let's just say that we have a parent that's sort of really sort of trying to radicalize children, trying to make them hateful, and I think ultimately this is somewhat what happens, because where do these children form these sort of beliefs that they have? And
exactly.
a lot, I think in this day and age though, where people grow up where people grow up with a fairly decent education, the knowledge tools are around, everyone has got access to I feel like you are seeing a lot of people say, wait a minute, my dad brought me up to say this and think this, and these people are actually pretty nice. It's I think it's a bit challenging there.
Look, the issue of taking children away is a really tough one, because this is the problem social services have all the time. Okay, their dilemma's this, right? It's very simple. If you've got a dysfunctional parents, okay, drugs or crime or violence or whatever it is, alcoholism. When a child's brought up in that environment, we know without any doubt it's detrimental to the children. The problem social services have with this issue is, we also know if you take children away from their parents, it's extremely traumatic for them. And plus, we also know if you put them into the foster care system, there's endless stories, from people
Yeah.
who've gone through that system who have even worse abuse in that
But
system.
this is something I really think that needs to be challenged. Like, you speak about children upbringing, also like you get to a point where some parents do voluntarily give their kids away. They go into the care
Yeah.
system, and it's almost like a sick joke. Like, if your kids you've been in care, so you've experienced a whole load of other stuff that's that sort of attributes to care homes and stuff, and I think we all know sexual assaults, violence, all this kind of stuff. Like, surely the government need to be doing something to fix this. Like,
Yeah.
I'm in favor of some form of military style boot camp uprising, especially of young boys, because unfortunately, it's young males that grow up in the care system that end up,
I
unfortunately.
think I think you need the correct authority, but the problems start way before that. They actually start from conception onwards. Children are coding and learning stuff from conception onwards. We know in the womb they're already learning a whole load of stuff, and there's research on this. But then once they're born, those first 7 years of a child's life before they become problematic and violent, if that's the way they're going to go, basically 95% of your damage is done then. This is why your parenting is so crucial, because it's those formative years of sort of conception to 7 years old where you form like 95% of your personality and your beliefs. And so that is where you have to go to solve this problem. But our approach is like massive education. You see, if you start educating people with this knowledge, and what we would do is, like I say, we would put this knowledge into all of education. So every child has a full understanding of psychology and all these issues we're talking about. And then we'd also do it for adults as well. So everybody in Britain has been exposed to this knowledge. What happens is you can't undo that. Once something is in somebody's consciousness, they can't forget it. They can't undo that experience. So what happens is people start thinking about this and talking about it, and it starts to filter through society and the culture, and the culture starts to slowly change. And then it starts filtering into all those dark areas where you've got these problems, because in those dark areas, the families where it's very dysfunctional, they're surrounded by this culture of knowledge, and it's much more likely to penetrate into those families and those areas of society. And you start to change the whole of your society with the right education. If you do this, it will work. Ideas spread. We have social media. If the government starts saying, look, we're putting this into the national curriculum, everybody will know about it with social media. The government said this, that, we have to learn and understand the psychology of parenting. It will become standard knowledge. And once you've got that knowledge, it changes people's behavior. And this is an evolution that takes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It doesn't happen overnight, but this is how you solve the problems. There's no quick fix. You've got to radically alter the consciousness of everybody. And we're all involved in this. We've all got prejudices. We've all got trauma from our childhood. We've all got biased opinions. We're all in this together, and we all need to change and become more conscious. And it is possible. We believe it's possible.
I think that most human beings that are capable and have that sort of have the sort of understanding of they understand their biases that they've been brought up with. But I think there's also a penny dropping moment where you think, wait a minute, okay, maybe I'm not thinking rational here, maybe I'm thinking emotional. Like, we're going to we'll speak slightly later on the incident that happened just last night in Ireland, where a man obviously tried to murder someone in the streets in a very graphic way. I mean, just going on that alone, last night I was doing a lot of research, listening to people talking about it, and some of the things I heard, there are people last night that are probably going to get bangs on the door today because the things that they were saying, they don't is there maybe a cooling off period that needs to happen after these sort of incidents happen? Because initially you respond with I call it the Liam Neeson moment, and I'll just explain that Liam Neeson is a prominent actor, and he spoke about it on a show once. He basically said that when he was younger, one of his friends, a young lady, was sexually assaulted by a black man, and he said that for that for about 2 hours, he went out into the streets and he was looking for any black man that he could find. And he said if he would have seen one, he would have probably killed them. He would have probably beaten them to death or something along the lines of that. And then after about 2 hours, he came round and thought, "What the hell am I doing?" But this is unfortunately, well, Marcus, you told me, is this a natural human response to hearing these things where you?
No. Okay. What happens is, I believe, is this. I've researched psychology all my life. So when people have these very acute emotional responses to things, this is directly related to a trauma in their childhood. It's triggering some event, a memory of some event in their childhood where they felt under attack, or they had some adverse childhood experience which was very traumatic for them. Now, in psychology, cannot tell the difference between time. It doesn't know can't distinguish between what's happening now and what happened in childhood. So what's happening in this Leon Neeson case is he's triggering some trauma in his childhood where he felt very threatened and very angry. Now, when you understand this, you can actually go back to those events and unpick them, and then you won't react in this same angry way. And this is exactly what's happening in the riots.
Yeah,
This
I
is
was going to
why
move on to that. Yeah.
yeah, we're going to get onto this. This is why people riot. It's triggering a trauma in their early childhood. So let me explain it another way. So if you go into prison and you observe the very violent prisoners, what would have happened is those violent prisoners, they would have had some very traumatic experience in their child. Maybe their father used to attack them and beat them, something like that. Now, in adulthood, when something triggers their sense of fear, they go straight back to that experience of being a child and being under attack and feeling very frightened. But now they're an adult male, and now they can defend themselves. So what happens is the fear completely overtakes them, and they go into fight mode and they become violent because they're so scared. When you're scared, you fight or you flight. This is what's happening, and it's what happens in the riots, and it's what happens when anybody has a strong emotional reaction to some event or formulates very strong, imbalanced opinions.
Yeah, Marcus, can I just interrupt you slightly there, please? Someone's obviously just put here, riots more like people are just reacting to the consequences of corrupt police and state.
Right. So the thing is this, okay, look, there's a difference between reacting and having a balanced reaction to it. Sorry, I didn't say that very well. So look, a civilized society, okay, when atrocities happen or injustices or discrimination happens, it does not react violently. It has a measured response, and it says, okay, first of all, let's look at facts and assess what is going on here. Then let's assess what is the root of the problem, and then what is it we all need to do to solve that problem. So, you know, there's nothing in my party that says people cannot formulate opinions about events and conclude that event was wrong in some way. What we are saying is a civilized society will do that calmly and rationally and objectively. And that's the difference. This is where things get very confused. You know, if somebody murders somebody else, the solution is not to go out and have violent riots and attack police and cause more injury and property destruction to innocent people and smash cars up. Clearly, this is not an objective response. And this gets some people are taught to believe that's the correct response to violence, more violence. Two wrongs don't make a right. So you need to educate on all of this. And the thing is, Brad, if somebody commits a crime and then we respond by committing more crime, we're becoming just like the criminal. We are the criminal. So you're literally contradicting yourself. You're saying, I don't agree with this crime, so I'm going to go and commit crime. You're contradicting yourself totally. Anybody who violently protests and reacts and riots is contradicting what they are saying they're standing against. They're saying we stand against violence, but then they're being violent. It's a total contradiction. It's completely uncivilized. It doesn't solve the problem.
Would you say it's a natural human response though to violence? Like, someone attacks someone's family members, and then like someone attacks my little brother, I go and find them and I attack them. Like, isn't that just a normal sort of response of human beings, would you say?
Right. It's a really good question. What constitutes a normal response? Is a normal response the response that society teaches you to have, or is there some deeper truth to it? We've got a choice about what we consider a normal, correct response to be. And it's taught. That is taught. There are cultures that are much more peaceful, and there are cultures that are more aggressive in their culture. And all of this is taught by the parents and education and the culture at large. There is no such thing as a normal response. It's just culturally taught. The way people react, they follow their cultures. In certain African countries, they are taught that you cut the genitals off of young girls. And that's completely normal and correct to them. And in our culture, we have things we're taught that are incorrect. We are taught it's really good to go out on Friday night and get so drunk, that you're passing out in the street. A lot of people, this is our culture. We have a drinking culture. No culture is immune from this. So what you've got to do to solve all of this, you need massive education and take everybody through that process where we say, okay, what response do we choose in our culture to be the correct and best response to these events? And I will always say, my party will always say, a balanced, non-violent response is always best, where you consider the facts and you formulate opinions based on facts and you look for the root problem rather than high emotional responses and violence. So, I don't think that there's no such thing as a normal response. It's just how we're taught to respond.
So what's interesting is one of the famous, she was one of during the riots when those three girls got killed. There was a lady that went viral. She went to prison as well. She set a bin on fire and she charged the police. She got 20 months in prison, and they interviewed her recently actually, and she was basically saying that her circumstances, where she was in life, she wasn't in the right place. Her mind was in a very volatile state, and she basically, like, it was just easy. And like you probably said there, things that have happened, her situation, like, and I think this is a big cause. There are people that are horrified when these things happen. Most human beings are horrified. Most normal human beings are horrified when these incidents happen. Just last night, early hours of the morning, I was up doing my work and I saw the incident that happened in Ireland, and I was lost for breath. It really affected me, and it was, it was heartbreaking. It didn't matter to me that the person, they didn't, which way the victim was, white person being attacked, black person being attacked. It didn't matter to me, but some people they're just not able to process that information. And also, Marcus, as well, something I mentioned yesterday is, how can people come out of the idea of not only caring when the victim is white? How, just putting it blunt.
Sorry, I'm not understanding the question there.
Sorry. I went on and then asked the final question was, how do we get people to sort of acknowledge their own bias within themselves so they don't only care when it's a white person as the victim?
Well, it goes back to the same thing. You need a very deep education process. People have to go on a journey of assessing their own behavior and asking themselves very challenging questions. And a lot of people don't want to do that. You've got to challenge your beliefs and say, is this belief serving me? Is it balanced? Is it objective? Is it based on facts? Does evidence support this? You have to go on that journey and start unpicking it, and then look at where somewhere in your past you formulated that belief, how it came about. And this is a very deep process. It's a process of self-inquiry, but you can't avoid it. As a party, right, we want to point out to everybody in Britain, if you want the problems in Britain to solve, then everybody's got to play their part in it, and everybody's got to start questioning themselves and understanding their part in that problem. And Brad, I want to pick up a point you made, okay, just prior to this question, because it feeds straight into this. So you say, people are appalled at these terrible acts. And this is true. There's no doubt about it. We see these terrible things that happen, people are appalled. But I tell you, these terrible acts, the potential for that is in everybody. We all have the potential to commit terrible acts, and history overwhelmingly proves this. I'll give you some examples. There's endless evidence for this. There is no culture on earth that has a spotless track record. Every culture on earth has demonstrated extreme violence and cruelty at certain points in its history. Britain is a prime example of this. The British people, only 150 years ago, we were fighting the Opium Wars. This is recent in human evolution. 150 years is nothing. We are no different to those people of 150 years ago who were fighting the Opium Wars. Britain was the only country in the world that at a government level sanctioned drug cartels. We were the biggest drug cartel on the planet that was government sanctioned. We're the only country in the world to have done that. Officially sanction drug trading and go to war when the country says to you, we don't want these drugs. It's having a bad effect on our population. So we go to war with them in the opium wars with China so we can keep selling them opium. Wow. We had the Zulu wars. We had lots of wars. So when people see these atrocious acts, there's nothing different, but really fundamentally between those people who commit these atrocious acts and us. We all have the same psychology. And I've mentioned it before. There's a very famous experiment that was done after the Holocaust in the Second World War. People are trying to understand how could the German people en masse support Hitler and so many of them be involved in the Holocaust and trying to exterminate the Jews. The Milgram experiment showed that normal people taken off the street would administer lethal electric shocks when they were put in a situation of authority. And I encourage people to go online and look up the Milgram experiment. And it showed how everybody is susceptible to committing atrocities. The Second World War shows this. The Holocaust shows it. The entirety of human history shows it. And all of modern psychology shows it. We are all susceptible to this, and we mustn't separate from it.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to go back too far. I mean, America's first act in this Iran war was to blow up a preschool where, where people, I don't know how people sleep at night. Good God. The first act that you do is that you blow up a preschool with, was it 170 odd children, little girls blown to pieces. Like,
Look at this, Brad. This is in the West, we tell ourselves quite often we're sort of morally superior. We would never do these things. The West stands for democracy, for freedom, for peace. But look what's happening in America. The American population voted Trump in when he had all these criminal cases running against him. And then he's behaved in exactly the way you'd expect him to, given the way he presented himself. And he's gone on to, launch these wars. And a lot of Americans are still supporting him on this. I think it's a minority now, but it's a substantial portion of the population. Yeah. So do you see this proves yet again in recent history that any society can quite out of the blue start committing atrocities and support it? Yeah. You see, one of the fundamental things, Brad, we need to understand in our education is that We are all susceptible to carrying out bad behavior. We're all susceptible to carrying out atrocities. There's no such thing as a good human being and a bad human being. We all have the same psychology and very similar potential to commit terrible crime. History, psychology overwhelmingly proves this. And this is a fundamental understanding we need to have. As soon as you say that group of people is bad and we are good, you perpetuate the problem and you'll never solve it. We have to level with each other. We have to understand that the line between good and bad runs in through everybody's heart.
Yeah. Marcus, how would your party deal with the rioters then? What should be the consequences of this?
Okay, so the rioting, I think it's clear what our policy would be. We have a two-pronged approach to this. Firstly, the authoritative side of it. If anybody commits a crime, and if it's in any violent crime in our system of my party, would get you straight in prison immediately. And by violent crime, I'm including, if you're throwing bricks, you're threatening violence, any threat or act of violence will get you straight in prison. That's how authoritative we would want to be. In our criminal justice system, we don't punish people, we rehabilitate them, but it's very, very authoritative. So, and we would fund it because our criminal justice system would be self-funding. The people who end up in prison will be working, earning a proper wage, and they'll be paying for their costs of prison. So there wouldn't be any shortage of prison space for them. If 100,000 people want to go and riot, 100,000 people are going to find themselves in prison. And those facilities will be there to do that, and they will pay for it. But the root of the problem, that in itself only suppresses the problem. It will never solve it. To solve it, you've got to go back to parenting, education, and the culture that everybody is brought up in. And that is the root of solving this problem. So you never have to put people in prison.
And how would your party deal with racism and accusations of racism?
Well, racism, again, it's very much the same thing. You deal with it through parenting and education. Racist views are formed largely from the parents and the culture that the person is brought up in. So you need to address all that with education and start changing that paradigm. But there's another aspect to this which I feel is really important. Whenever a crime happens, the motive for the crime, in a sense, is irrelevant. And I don't mean that in a dismissive way. What I mean by that is, look, if somebody goes out and murders somebody else, it doesn't matter how they justify it. The murder is wrong, it's against the law, and you end up in prison. I think everybody agrees pretty much that murder's wrong. So it doesn't matter how their murder is motivated, whether it was racially motivated, whether it was an act of, emotion because they had some breakup with their girlfriend, or whether it was because, whatever the reason is, it doesn't really, it's not the important factor. The important factor is they committed a crime, and it's got to be dealt with in the right way. So what we feel that when you link crime and you say this person was murdered and the murderer did it because they've got a thing against this minority of people, when you say that and you link it to racism, it doesn't help. It just becomes divisive, and it reduces the chances of actually getting to root cause and solving the problem properly, because it inflames people. And when we're inflamed with emotion and we're feeling angry, you don't solve problems like that. So we want to decouple crime from racism. It doesn't matter if it was racially motivated. You just deal with each individual crime as it is. If somebody's done something wrong, it doesn't matter the color of their skin and their victim's skin. What matters is they committed that crime and it needs dealing with. And that's the way we want to deal with things. We want to decouple all these things from racism or whatever the excuse for the crime is. And I just think this would be very beneficial and something we need to do.
Okay. do you not think if we do that, if we don't talk about the motive to why someone done something, do you not think that maybe that, yeah, I think you have a tough challenge trying to help that person,
Right.
rehabilitate that person, if you don't address the reason why they committed that crime. And if people commit crimes based on race and all the rest of it, surely there's some sort of training or learning needs to be done to sort of de-radicalize them, if you like, from that.
Correct. So again, I think it's a really important question. You see, okay, let's just put it into a concrete example. Somebody, all right, a black person kills a white person because they don't like white people. So they're racist and they do it, okay? Now, the thing is, okay, their racism isn't the primary reason why they've carried out that crime. It's the way they rationalize it, and it's their excuse for committing that crime. But it's not actually the root of their motivation. And this is absolutely crucial to understand. When criminals commit acts of crime, they will rationalize it in a certain way because of racism or because somebody did something to them or whatever. They will give it a rationalization to justify their crime. This is basic human psychology. But that rationalization will never be the root cause of their committing crime. The root cause, and it gets very repetitive, will go back to their childhood where they were traumatized and taught to behave in this way. That is the root cause of their crime. They're saying I'm doing it because I don't like white people or I don't like black people. That's just a mental justification for their crime in their head. But it's not what is driving them to commit the crime. It's superficial level. You have to go down into the subconscious, and it's the subconscious that is driving them to commit these crimes. This is why we need to decouple crime from racism or any other issue, because it is not the root cause of why people behave like this.
Yeah.
It goes deeper than that, to their childhood and their psychology they formed in their childhood. That is where you solve the problem. So I hope that answers your question. This is
Yeah,
why.
I suppose so. Because even like everyone knows, everyone has biases, but most normal
Exactly. We all do.
most people don't go out and kill people. I think that if they did, if it was at that sort of epidemic rate where people acted on emotions and just went out and killed people, we'd be living in, it'd be the end of the world basically. But we'll move on slightly. But just want to address
Okay.
someone quickly. I just want to address someone. Danielle, I will message you privately because Danielle is someone that lives that the attack last night happened on her street, and obviously her blood's well, she says her blood is boiling, and I'll definitely speak to her later
Does she have
regarding
a
this.
question at all for us?
Danielle, do you have any questions that you want to put out? How
We'd love to
obviously,
hear your view on this.
how you say your blood's boiling? It happened on your streets. What's the sort of temperature? What's the sort of, what are people's thoughts on this? I can only imagine, but and Marcus, the natural sort of response that I've heard, and which I've which I can only sort of predict is going to come and come again, is people saying, right, this is it. This is the reason why we need to stop letting people in and send everyone back now. And, based on the actions of this one person, basically send everyone else back now. What do you think? What would your answer be to that, Marcus? Someone saying that to you.
We're talking about immigration now, and it's whether it's relevant in this murder of Henry Nowak.
It will be, trust me, Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, all the big guys, they will be using this to attack the immigration policy.
Again, from my online research, here we go. Let's try and look at the facts here. My online research says that that Vikram Digwa, the guy who's been convicted of this crime, was born in this country.
Yep.
So he's not sort of an immigrant in that way. I imagine that his family emigrated and he was born in this country. So he's not an immigrant, and therefore the far right groups can't suggest immigration is what's causing this.
Don't worry. Don't worry, Marcus. They will be. They will be.
Well,
But we'll move
the
on. We'll
facts
move
just
on.
don't support it. The facts it's just not happened in this case. Now, of course, there will be cases where illegal immigrants or immigrants come in and commit crimes, just like the resident population commit crimes. But I
Yeah,
don't think that was the situation here in this case. So
yeah,
if
yeah,
they're making that argument, they're just using the wrong evidence to support
yeah,
it.
yeah. Let's move on to, obviously we're staying on this slightly, but this whole thing has brought up this awareness almost of the Sikhs, their religion, and them being able to them carrying a kirpan, a knife, as a sort of religious sort of ceremony knife that which they carry.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't. A lot of people didn't even know that Sikhs actually carry some practicing Sikhs actually do carry the kirpan. Some have a bracelet, but
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on carrying the kirpan?
Well, can I say first of all, I mentioned this last time. My children are half Sikh, so it's a culture that I'm very closely linked with. My ex-wife is Sikh, born in this country, but her family, her parents emigrated over here. So here's the thing. I've looked into the law on this briefly, and this issue is broader than just the Sikhs carrying knives. And I'll explain why. So the Scottish have some sort of ceremonial knife or something they wear, I think, with their kilt sometimes. The
Okay.
Welsh also have such a thing. The Gurkhas have it, and we have a long history of using the Gurkhas. They fought for us in pretty much every war we fought in. And also the Arabians have a culture of carrying a knife as well. Now, the way the law is at the moment, again, from my brief research, is that where there's a legitimate cultural reason to carry a ceremonial knife, it is permitted. And the Sikhs fall under that. But here's the thing, so do the Welsh, so do the Scottish, so do the Gurkhas and the Arabians. So if you're going to make a rule for the Sikhs, you'd have to make it for all of those. And we would lose, in terms of our Scottish and Welsh traditions, the right to wear their traditional dress. So the issue's broader than just the Sikhs carrying a knife. Now, the second thing is this, okay, facts again. Let's assess this objectively. In the Henry Nowak murder, Vikram Digwa, I believe from my research, was carrying two knives.
Yeah.
One of them was the Sikh kirpan, a
Yeah.
much smaller blade, which was ceremonial, and that's the one that he's allowed to carry. The other one was a much longer blade that was sharp and that he carried out the murder with. So he didn't really use the kirpan to carry out this murder. It's not actually directly relevant, the kirpan, in this case. And the law is 100% clear. Any ceremonial knife, as soon as it's used in threat or to commit a crime, this is completely illegal.
Yeah.
Just because you can carry a knife, as soon as you draw it or threaten somebody with it, you're immediately committing a crime, and your rights to do that obviously do not exist. So, I think the law, given I don't really think people having genuine cultural reasons to carry these symbolic blades is the cause of the problem. And if people do go on to commit crimes, they're not doing it because of this law. It's not the law that's enabling them to commit these crimes. So really, I don't see it as actually hugely relevant to these crimes. As I said, Vikram chose to carry a second, much bigger knife. That's what
Yeah.
he used to commit the crime.
Yeah.
So I think the law is fairly balanced, and probably I don't see a need to change it.
Okay. People will suggest. Well, Claire's put in the comments the ceremonial knife, but it's used for self-defense purposes. So is that not a flawed argument? Because if you think about it, if someone, and this is where it gets really confusing. In America, you're allowed to open carry. If you,
Yeah,
Marcus, come up to me in a threatening manner, and I'm
yeah,
allowed to carry, if I've got an open carry, I can legally pull my gun out and shoot you dead. I can
Yeah.
legally do that. This happens in arguments over parking spaces in America. That's how far gone they are. Thank God we're not in that situation. I feel like there's not an epidemic of Sikhs going around
Exactly.
stabbing people with their
Precisely.
kirpans. You know, these are isolated incidents, and they are blown up like, you know, as if, like, you know, Sikhs are generally going out there stabbing people. It doesn't happen. If you look at the stats, I downloaded the stats for murders just last year alone, and overwhelmingly, guess who's committing these murders? You know, it is the native dominant population of the country, whatever you want to call it. And I think most people
Yeah.
understand what I mean by that.
Brad,
It's
I think you're 100% right. And this, again, this is all part of this crucial process of learning to assess data and facts before coming to opinions, rather than emotional reaction to highly charged, very rare events. And, you know, the only grounds in my book that you would change the law on carrying kirpans and these other ceremonial lives that the Welsh and the Scottish and the Gurkhas carry would be if there's statistical evidence to support that. So if we had an epidemic of people using genuine kirpans to go out and stab other people, then that is grounds for changing the law. But I don't believe, I haven't researched this properly, but I don't believe for an instant that is the case. And it's not the case in this murder.
no,
He
no.
chose a second knife. He didn't do it with the kirpan. He chose a knife for attacking people specifically. So
Yeah.
you can't base law on isolated, highly charged emotional events, which is what happens in politics all the time. And politicians cave into this. When there's a highly charged emotional event in the media, they formulate law to placate the British population. And this is weak leadership, and it should never happen. And politicians should stand up and say, wait a minute, let's look at the facts and the statistics. Is there a need to change the law or not? And we would always do that, whether it's popular or not. We'll always go to the facts and the statistics and make law properly evidence-based, not reactive to highly charged emotive events and public opinion.
Mm. Marie, I don't think the police were racially discriminatory. I believe their training has made them prioritize a race. When you say prioritize a race, Marie, do you think that you think that police officers are told and trained to prioritize black and brown lives over white lives? Because I don't think statistically that makes any sense whatsoever. Respectfully, Marie, if you go through cases, I don't think that's the case. And unfortunately, Marcus, this is what's happened here. You know, I've heard I don't know the exact sort of numbers and stuff. Someone's just thrown me right off there with that, but never mind. I'm gonna have to move on. Someone's thrown me right off. Right, Marcus,
Can I say,
JD.
Brad, can I say, look, I think another important aspect of this, you know, we've got all these institutions through society, okay? We've got the government institutions, you know, the NHS, the police service, the judicial service, etc. And then we've got big businesses and corporations, etc. And we've got all sorts of racial groups. You know, there's lots of groups and institutions throughout any society. And, you know, I think it's really important to understand every group's and every institution's role, and that they're doing their best, and that all institutions and groups of people are full of human beings, and we all have flaws in us. So any institution, you know, if you've got 10,000 people working in an institution, there's absolutely statistically bound to be some people in there who aren't going to behave in the right way. It doesn't matter what the institution is, whether it's the police force or anything else. You have to expect this, because this is the nature of all of us as human beings. We're not perfect. And, you know, the police, I think, get a hard time sometimes. And I'm not for a minute suggesting each case shouldn't be investigated and assessed whether they behaved in the right way. But I think there should be a consciousness that any institution will only be as correct in its behavior as society is in general. Does that make sense? The police force can't be expected to be any better than the average person, because the police force comes from the people of Britain, just like the NHS does, or just like government does. People think politicians or a certain group are different to everybody else. They're not. They're doing their best within their job under huge pressure, just like the police or the NHS or teachers or anything else. And there's no point just vilifying whole institutions. It doesn't help. You need to investigate individual cases, but you need to understand human beings are not perfect, and any institution will always have problems.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. This is not an open show that you can just join. Unfortunately, my 3 o'clock show, you can openly welcome to join in. So just drop down respectfully, and I'll be going live at 3 o'clock. You're welcome to come in at 3 o'clock. But guys, let's move on to the final one.
Okay.
We've had a lot of, let's just say, interference from and people politicizing these incidents that happen. I'm still waiting for the day they do it when a black or brown person is the victim of a crime, but it doesn't seem to be the case. We've got JD Vance, loads of different other sort of, Elon Musk. He's a big one. He just for the life of me, can people not see that people are trying to push an agenda here? There is something deeply wrong here. Some people, and this is at the highest level, we're talking about JD Vance and Elon Musk. They are pushing this agenda. And it's so, if you've got common sense, if you haven't got any bad bias in your brain, surely, yes, I get it. When emotional things happen, it makes you see red, you see see the mist, the red mist,
Right.
you see it. But surely, guys, you've got to understand, human beings are human beings. Black, white, brown, whatever it is.
Exactly.
There's good and bad in everyone. There'll be people suggesting from this incident that happened last night that we send every single person out of our NHS and we send them home, which would be catastrophic. And I think for people to understand the depth of it, I had someone yesterday saying that, he would refuse care from a Muslim doctor. I had someone that came on and said that because he had served in the Afghan war. He's obviously not been, I don't know whether the government have done a good job deprogram him after the war to sort of move on with his life. But you've got people that really just don't understand. Like in myself, I even mention myself. I say this all the time. Without people from other country, without immigrants that I've personally hired to go out and do work in certain areas, where no one wants to go, no one wants to look after the veterans that are suffering. Some of them nearly 90 years old, some of them older. Without that, these veterans would be sat and sleeping in their piss and crap, respectfully, which a lot of people are, because a lot of people are being neglected because there just isn't the resources, enough people to go around. But Marcus, over to you.
Can I go back to your point about Elon Musk and his getting involved in British politics?
Yeah.
Can you see how his behavior perfectly is a perfect example of precisely what I was saying? So look at Elon Musk. How does he behave? He reacts strongly to events, and he throws out very wild, highly emotionally charged views on X. What happened in his childhood? He literally said in interviews, he has said that I think at school, he was beaten so badly that he had to go to hospital and he nearly died, and that his father used to beat him. So there it is. There's the trauma in his childhood is driving him to react very strongly to events that happen. He plays out this psychology perfectly. And as you can see, how do you solve that? It's so obvious now. You have to make sure children are brought up in loving, stable environments. Then they'll never behave like this. You can have the same event and two people will react to it completely differently. The person who's traumatized in their childhood will react very strongly to the event, the atrocity, and they might become violent. A person has a very stable upbringing in a loving environment and they have the right education, they would react calmly to the event, they'd assess the facts, They'd look for the root of the problem and propose a solution to it. And that's the difference. And we want to get to that place where people react calmly, assess facts, find the root of the problem, and then propose a solution to it.
Yeah, it's very stressful. It's like I find myself repeating myself over and over again, having to say the same thing over again. In terms of good and bad, and everyone and people are like, yes, the people were saying yesterday. Well, how do we know? Like my stance on immigration is very clear. We will never ever be able to solve every like you say every country's problems. Like we'll never be able to. We can stop causing some problems via
Yeah.
via these wars and stuff for sure, but the
Yeah.
only and we can't take everyone from them countries anyway. The only real answer is safe cities that are backed by some sort of NATO protected sort of treaty where we can build safe cities in some of these countries where we can where we can even help them. Like the amount of money we're spending on immigration, we could spend that in them countries building something and maybe even turning a profit from it. Like we should be making money from immigration, not losing money from it. We could build safe cities where we say, right, look, your government, you're not doing your job, you're not looking after your people, you've got all this madness going on. We're going to build safe cities in your country, and that might sound like bullish, but ultimately it will be a safe city where where it's regulated by, I want to say, Western law almost as well. But it would be better for those people that we help them in their own countries for sure, rather than we can't just give money as well, because we know it will just end up in weapons, drugs, or the rest of it. Like we can't do that. So the only real answer is to help people in their countries and set up a system of immigration where the most desperate people can apply from all around the world. But there's a system and there's a vetting process, and we prioritize women and children. I think if you just have men, I get it, it's a treacherous journey, that's why the men will probably be the ones going out and doing that. But if we get the process right, where it's just like, look, we're only accepting women and children right now, we're accepting the most desperate people, or people that can come and bring some skills that we're desperately in need of. I think that is the ultimate answer. Just bringing people into the country in bulk, it's only a matter of time. And some of the countries these people are coming from, they're countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, countries that we've blown the shit out of, but in no without layman's terms there. Well, in layman's terms, some of these people are gonna bear grudges. Like some of these people are gonna bear grudges, and you don't know what's going on. There could be someone that comes over that's part of a terrorist cell or something like that. That is a fact. You could have one or two people that sneaks in with 1,000 or 2,000 people, and then that one person commits a crime. Lo and behold, everyone's got to go back now. Now everyone is demonized. So it's a really challenging process.
I think there's a point I'd make on these type of issues with international politics, and it's a very harsh point, and it might cause reaction in people, and people might not agree with it. But the thing is, okay, we live in a world of basically sovereign nations where you have countries that have a clearly defined border and a sovereign government. And the thing is, right, I think there's huge confusion amongst people and international politics about responsibility. If you have a sovereign nation with a border around it, then the only people that really bear responsibility for what happens in that country is the people of that country. And this is a very harsh truth. You see, I think humanity naturally, and has a feeling that we should help other countries. And yes, in principle, I agree with that entirely. But the reality is, if you have no power within that country and it's a sovereign nation, only the people within that country create the problems they have, and only they can solve it. You can't, an external force cannot come into a country and solve all the problems when it's a sovereign nation. They don't have the power, they don't have the infrastructure, the political ability to do that. And I think this is a really important point, because if no nation ask Britain to go and lead it. We don't have countries in Africa saying, can you lead us, please? Can you come over here and install a government in our country and lead us? They've said the opposite. They don't want white rule. They want to rule themselves. So they've got to have the consequences of that. So you can't have it both ways. And I think there's huge confusion about responsibility and who's responsible for what happens in a country. And it has to be in a sovereign country, it has to be the people within that country. And there's no ultimate responsibility for other nations to sort their problems out. A, they can't do it. And B, they're not responsible for those problems. And I think we have to be honest about this truth because it confuses everyone.
But I think if we're being honest, you know, we know that these countries are being exploited for their natural resources. We know that that is just a fact. They are being exploited. Like most of the dictators that we've come up against in the Middle East, America's put them in power. Like, America's put most of these dictators in power and done deals with them at some point. And then all of a sudden, soon as they've said, you know what, we don't want to do deals with you anymore, guess what's coming? The wars are coming. We don't live in a lovely. How can a country that has diamonds, or like Congo, for instance, it's the Elon Musk wouldn't be able to run his business. Well, he probably would, but he gets a lot of his stuff from the mines that we've got little children in digging, and supplementing all his wealth for his Tesla batteries and all the rest of it. I can't remember what the material is, but
Rod, I'm not suggesting that countries don't get involved in other countries' affairs and influence it. I'm not suggesting it at all. And that is a different debate. All my point was centered on just the basic principle of responsibility. Now, everybody's responsible for their actions, but what I'm saying is, if a country isn't interfering in another country, then it's not responsible for what's going on in that country. That's all I'm saying. So, and generally, Britain isn't interfering in other countries.
Officially, officially, no. But I think we know that it's corporations. We have massive corporations, oil companies, and stuff. And why do you think Nigel Farage has been given £5 million by a crypto guy? As soon as he gets into power, there's going to be a backhanded deal. Like Donald Trump exposed all those politicians in America when he was running for president, the first campaign, where he clearly came out and said, look, for so long I've given these guys money and they do exactly what I say. He exposed them all. I give them money and they do as I say. And this is probably
This is a different issue. I'm not saying people don't influence other people or groups or countries with money or trade or whatever else. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm just saying, as a basic principle of responsibility, if a country self-governs itself and other countries don't interfere with it, then other countries are not responsible for what happens in that country. That is all I'm saying. I'm not denying the things you say
I agree.
happen.
I agree. I agree. I agree
I'll
on
give
that
you
as
another
well.
example of where this gets confused, okay? Donald Trump with his sanctions, trade sanctions, okay? He says, China have been terrible to us, and he talks as though America is a victim of Chinese interference and that somehow China has forced America to buy all these Chinese products. And that is why there's this huge trade deficit with China. That is completely false narrative. The American people are not, you don't have Chinese with guns against their heads saying you will buy our products. It doesn't happen. They do it out of their own choice because the Chinese make good products at a very good price. That is why they buy the products. America is not a victim or been hard done by China. It's entirely America's choice. And do you see what I'm saying here? This is what I'm saying. It's a sovereign country. It makes its own choices. It can't play victim to these things. Every country is responsible for itself if it's a sovereign country. It makes its own decisions and it has the consequences of them. And it's not other countries' responsibilities to sort out these problems. So this narrative, I think, is very confused. Unless we go to a one world leadership system, then this is always going to be the case. Sovereign nations are responsible for themselves.
Yeah, I just think the boats are going to keep coming, and like I said, this doesn't have to be a charity mission, and it would be a very bullish mission as well. Like, and it'd be a very strong. Probably only Donald Trump or Zhe Lijiang or Putin would do something like that anyway. Where they would say, but I think if they had the problem of immigration from, especially from certain regions, at some point they say, look, you've got all your people coming over to our country. What the hell's going on? What's going on in your country? Why these people can't? Why these people don't feel safe, and why they can't, live a normal, promising life. If you don't sort it out, we're going to carve out a region in your country and we're going to make it a safe zone. I feel like this will happen eventually anyway. To be honest with you, it will happen eventually anyway, but it probably won't be. We don't in England don't tend to have strong leaders like that would do something like that. I think you'll see China, Russia, but they'll probably do it in more of a diplomatic sort of way. We'll say, right, let us help you out a little bit. And China's already doing that all over Africa. They are doing certain things, helping them build, helping them with like the Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, they're doing a hell of a lot of good things for the country there now. It's promising. But guys, it's been a great show. We've rambled on. We went up, we went down. We've had a lovely chat, guys. This is Marcus White, leader of Everyone's God political party. And Marcus, before we go, anything you want to say?
Yeah, well, I think it's been a really interesting debate today. And I think maybe, what I'm thinking is we're talking about this whole thing of sovereign nations, and maybe we should do a show on dictatorship, the whole phenomenon of dictatorship and how countries are controlled, and this whole issue of how they govern themselves.
I would love to. I personally, Marcus, I would love to look at the China method, where they have one policy, one. They have one. The Chinese Communist Party. They have one political party. If politicians are found to be even anywhere near corrupt or anything like that, these politicians, there's swift punishment for them. And I feel like this is something that's missing in this country. I feel like it's just laughable. Like, if something like this Nigel Farage situation happened in China, one of those guys took £5 million, they would probably never be seen again. But we'll leave it there anyway, Marcus, and we'll definitely try and look at another show for another day. Marcus, it's been great as always. Everyone, make sure you go to the Everyone Is God Political Party on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. We're a new channel, twice a week, guys. Tuesdays, Thursdays, 1 p.m. we try to kick off. Peace and love to you guys.
Thank you everyone for watching. I'm Marcus White, leader of Everyone Is God, Britain's most visionary political party. Subscribe to us on YouTube or visit our website if you would like to find out more and get involved.